you. Good evening, viewers.
Yes. Our very first question to you, would like to understand your opinion. What do you think is the root cause of the conflicts between the landlords and the tenants in the city?
Well, a number of reasons. One, institutional breakdown, because there are institutions that are charged with the affairs of the traders in Kampala, but they are not functional. They are more or less moribund. You'll talk about, for example, the National Chamber of Commerce is not functional. I doubt whether you even know the person chairing it. There is the Rent Restriction Act, makes a provision for the creation of a rent board by the minister in charge of trade. It is non-existent. There is also an umbrella association for the traders, Casita. It's not also helping matters because they are more or less, they are much aligned to the landlords than the tenants. So that also creates that situation. So that institutional breakdown has created a situation where the tenants are helpless. They are the mercy of the landlords. Again, when you talk about specific issues like the recent incident of
Tenants closing the shops?
Tenants closing the shops.
Yes.
Well, yes, there is also lack of clear policies to regulate trade in Uganda. Those policies are not there. I know it is, well, this is not a command economy. One would say, yes, it's a market economy. But this business of laissez-faire cannot address the crisis we are facing. Of course, there should be some interventions made, deliberate interventions made by government. However much you are saying issues should be left to market forces, there should be deliberate interventions made by government. For example, yes?
In fact, you talk of what should be done, and my next question to you was going to be, what do you think, you talk of institutional breakdown, what exactly do you think should be done to stop these conflicts, because they've been going on and on for quite a long time?
When it comes to rent tariffs, we have the legal regime in place. We have the instrument to regulate that, but it is redundant. It's in abeyance. The Rent Restriction Act has not been implemented, and government has not taken any step to put it in place, to implement it. Yes, now they have come up with a new bill. It spells out a number of things which should be done. The Landlord Tenant bill. But if there are no mechanisms in place to enforce the regulations put in place, certainly it will also be a redundant law. But it's a laudable one. It has got provisions on how rent should be handled, how frequent one should increase rent. It makes a provision for rent to be paid in Uganda currency, not in dollars. Also provision on format of tenants agreement, because most of these tenants do not have agreements. You know, the relationship between a landlord and a tenant is contractual, but you find it's not structured, it's not formalized. So they are the mercy of the landlords. So now the innovation, the new element within this law is to make it mandatory that a tenant agreement must be signed. But if you don't empower the tenants, if they don't have the associations, if they don't have what it takes to assert themselves, certainly that law will also be redundant. So
according to you, if this bill was already passed by the parliament, do you think it would have helped the tenants?
If there is a commitment to enforce it, it's one thing to pass a legislation and totally another to have it implemented. So those two things should be critically reflected on, the two elements. Enactment of the law, it should be fast-tracked, but also working out a mechanism of enforcing the same. Otherwise, this relationship, which is unregulated, leaving the tenants at the vagaries of market forces, will just worsen the situation. The other thing, to be more specific about this theory, because they have their own peculiar problems, those of Kwarisel, Jabori and Nabukera arcades. There are wrangles involving different landlords, different
the landowners,
the
building owners.
Yes, you have Drake Rubega, you have Mansur Yanga, you have Uboa, Uganda Bus Association, whatever, and a couple of others. They are all conflicting about ownership of that land. So for that particular dispute, I would attribute I would attribute the crisis there is in those arcades to the head of state, the president. Why? He has convened several meetings to handle those matters. He has invited the different, government officials, Deputy Attorney General, Honorable Mwesigwa Rukutana, the IGP, and many others. Well knowing that this matter is a subject of litigation in the courts of law. And they have issued the conflicting directives on the preservation of the status quo. On the one hand, you would discover that actually, in 1 month alone, February, they issued the 2 letters. But one was dated 19th Feb, another one dated 26th September 2019. You can imagine. It's post-dated. All vesting possession of the properties into different landlords. The one of 26th September was talking of Horizon coaches belonging to the late Muhanji taking possession pending determination of the dispute by courts. Then the one of 19th February was vesting possession in Mansour Young. And now they are conflicting, putting the tenants in the total confusion. You know, the tenants were at a loss as to where they should deposit rent. Now, when Muhanji died and Drake Rubega took over, he said, no, you have to pay all the areas stretching as far back as November last year. Then they said, how can that happen? Because we have already been paying. And it is the authorities of government, agencies of government, institutions of government issuing these conflicting directives regarding the status quo. But how do you make the tenants suffer because of the confusion within government agencies? And this, as I said, I attribute it directly to President Museveni. Because they know the matter is before court. Why don't you leave it to court to decide? And it is very simple, by the way. Courts have got mechanism of addressing issues to do with the status quo as matters are being subjected to adjudication. So in this particular case, court would determine who should take a possession. It's a very simple matter. Court would say, so and so should be in charge. Or in the alternative, court would say, let money be deposited on a particular account pending resolution of the disputes. But now they are issuing conflicting, they are deploying their forces, ESOs, MI, police, and whatnot, tear gassing people, which is uncalled for, which is totally unnecessary. They are the ones who are causing the conflicts. They are the ones who are fueling up the
so according to you, you think it is the government facilitating this wrangle in the business center? Yeah,
well, actually, right from the time they made the allocations, several properties have been allocated to different individuals. Don't forget that used to be Basabaganda Park. It used to be public property, public asset. They decided to alienate it. And the process of alienating it, they committed fraud, let me say that. They committed fraud.
The government.
Allocating it to different individuals, giving rise to the current conflicts, which they are aggravating by issuing contradictory statements as to ownership and possession. And that has put the tenants at a disadvantage. That's why I was appealing to them, the tenants. They should not sit back and be at the receiving end. Yes, of course, they have been assertive, but we need to take a proactive approach towards addressing the challenge using the avenues provided for under the law. And that's what we are from back
on. A proactive approach. According to you, what is that one solution you would actually recommend in the short term?
Well, in the short term, court should wake up. Actually, I not spare court in this. Disputes must be resolved as soon as practical, as possible. But they tend to procrastinate, to drag on, to delay, and in the end, you worsen the situation. I don't see the reason why court is not pronouncing itself on this matter. Because this matter has dragged on for a long time. So what should address the crisis now? In those 3 arcades, one, court to come and pronounce themselves on the status quo. Who should be in charge of those premises as litigation goes on. If they cannot resolve the dispute now, at least they should direct the tenants where to deposit the rent, and who should be responsible on the management of the properties. But court cannot also sit and witness the situation as it takes its own course. That is dangerous. The other thing, generally speaking, about addressing the concerns and grievances of the business community in Kampala, we need to fast track the process of enacting that law, the landlord tenant law. That relationship must be regulated, and as much as it's contractual, it must be regulated. But as of now, these pseudo tycoons, they are pseudo, because actually you find that even the way they manage these properties is not professional. You find somebody passing off as a tycoon, but what things they do, awful. They pick money directly from you. They will come to your shop and say, Sandra, you have no agreement. To just come to you, say you'll pay this much. Say, for example, $1 million. And when because they want to default, they don't want to pay taxes, they will give you probably, if they are generous enough, they can give you a receipt of around 300 or 500. When it comes to electricity, it has to be borne by the tenants. All the outgoings borne by the tenants, including property rates, garbage collection and whatnot. Actually, they are facing the tenants of their resources, their monies. And government is just watching. You have a whole minister in charge of trade. I don't know what she's doing. Whole minister. All this crisis you are seeing, she has not visited the scene at all. With all due respect, you have the National Chamber of Commerce. Who is the executive director person? They used to fight over leadership of National Chamber of Commerce. What has happened now? You have the private sector foundation. You have Casita. You have all these agencies. They are all seated. It's a battle between the tenants, the business community, and police. So now Kampala streets have been turned into a battlefield when government is just watching. What they are doing is just to come and tear gas people, arrest them, beat them up, and whatnot. That's not going to solve the solution. So they should first track the process of enacting the landlord tenant. Actually, before they do that, if they have not finalized the process, probably what they can do is to implement the existing one. It was enacted way back in 1949. It is still good law now, statute book. The Rent Restriction Act. It provides for the creation of a rent board, and that one regulates the tariffs, the rent tariffs, and how often the intervals of increment and whatnot. So that should be implemented. If they cannot implement it, let them fast track the enactment of the new one. Yeah. Speaking
broadly, we've also had landlords, suddenly closing their buildings and, closing the traders out. Do you think it is more or less the same problem?
Well, of course, it all stems from the fact that there is no regulatory mechanism in place. There is no state intervention. I've not seen it anywhere in the world where you subject your people to the vagaries of market forces 100%. It has not happened even in ultra-capitalist countries like America, like United Kingdom. It does not happen that way. There are always interventions made by the state. So in this particular case, just tell me one policy which has been enacted to protect the interests of tenants in Uganda. It is not there. So you are making them suffer. And don't forget, by the way, our economy is based on trade. 70% of our budget comes from traders. 70%. They make that contribution to the national coffers. Our budget this financial year is slated to be 37 trillion. But you can imagine 70% of that is coming from within here, Kampala. You cannot abandon the cradle, the basket where you get all the taxes from. That basket, you abandon it and leave it to the forces, to market forces. These so-called landlords, those who come and just
close the
buildings. You see, the way they have subjected the tenants to some kind of inhuman and degrading treatment. They treat them as slaves, by the way. Like slaves. There's one time, because of their wrangles over ownership, the disputes, Mansuri Yanga came and closed 17 commercial malls. 17, you can imagine. Even those which were not involved in the wrangles, because the conflicts are in respect to only 3. Jambori, Nabukera, and Parisel. But he ended up closing 17 including those dragging in those who are not even concerned with the disputes at bus parks.
So according to
the question is, why didn't government take action against him? And no action. It could be criminal or civil. Not even a civil action being taken. And this is what I was impressing upon the tenants. That if you had a very strong and robust association that would fight for your interests, akin to
Lord Mayor, in
yes.
the event that landlords ought to close their buildings, what is the procedure? What is the current procedure for them to follow?
Of course, the relationship is contractual. It will all depend on the agreement. By the way, you need a court order. We have in the past we have had what is called Distress for Rent Act. Distress for Rent Act. And it lays out procedures you have to follow. That if I've defaulted on my obligation to pay rent, you don't simply come and close my premises. You have to go to seek for a court order. We call it Distress for Rent Order. You would go to Chief Magistrate Court the Chief Magistrate Court, you file the necessary application, you get a court order that allows you to access my premises. Because I have got proprietary, I have also got interest. You don't simply come and trespass on my premises. A landlord who comes without a court order to close my business is a trespasser. He's a trespasser. So you go to court, get a court order, and you get beliefs. But that does not happen. These people just come, like I said, it's a system which is so informal that they don't even have property managers. Not even a single tycoon downtown there has got a property manager. They manage the properties themselves. They don't do it professionally. I've told you, they don't sign contracts. That's why it's being made mandatory under the new legal framework being proposed. That that tenants agreement, a format of which is provided in the schedule, should be mandatory, that you sign it. But as I said, it will all depend on the way government puts in place mechanisms of causing enforcement of the same. That will make the change. Because we can enact good laws, but they may not come to the rescue of the vulnerable tenants as long as they remain incapacitated. Okay,
what about the landlords that are saying that they're simply responding to the president's directive not to let the tenants pay their rent in dollars? And you know, sometimes they have loans to pay. Yeah. What do you have to say about that? Well,
with loans to pay, yes, that is acceptable. It is a valid and legitimate issue. And this government has not addressed this. I heard the other day when Mr. Museveni was addressing the NRM caucus in Kyankwans, talking about the ever-souring interest rates. And I wondered and I said, where have you been all along? We have cried out loud and clear that we should cap the interest rate. Our neighbors here in Kenya have done it successfully. But right now, the cost of doing business, the cost of investment in this country is very high because of the ever-increasing interest commercial rates. It's too high. Between now, it ranges between 25 to 30. That is too much. So the tenants, the landlords, on the one hand, have got that legitimate concern. But they should not pass on the burden 100% to the tenants. They shouldn't do that. That is not acceptable at all. Yes, you are an investor. You've contracted loans at a very exorbitant cost. Don't pass it on directly to the tenants.
What is the likely effect if this continues without getting resolved? What happened?
I said we're on a time bomb. You know, what is happening is not sustainable. The tenants will continue asserting themselves. The police will intervene to quell the protests, and the Kampala will go up in flames. That's what's going to happen. And we always, naturally, we shall be blamed that the Rukwagos are politicking, they are inciting violence, we are going to be arrested and prosecuted on that account. But we can't sit back because as leaders we also have an obligation. This way, permit me to respond again to the issue raised of directives, the directive that was issued by the president. For heaven's sake, let us not operate on directives like it's been happening with the Trump executive orders. This is a country which believes in the rule of law, constitutionalism. And so what you've got to do is to come up with a well-structured system that is going to address those concerns, and that has to be laid down in the Act.
We also captured you on camera recently where you are promising the tenants that you would find a solution for them, you would defend their rights. How far are those plans? How far? And how are you going to help the tenants?
One case by case, at least for the 3 arcades, I've gotten some documental evidence. I've studied since the time I visited them. I was given a number of documents which I've scrutinized, and I've tried to do my background check on all these matters and do some study. Obviously, Drake has no ground legal basis to continue pushing for the tenants to pay him rent, because he's acting actually on the letter from the Attorney General. The Attorney General cannot act as a court. This is not a matter between the government and the tenants. I don't even know how the Attorney General comes in. He's acting on the recommendation of the Attorney General to the police that the status quo ante be restored. That is, vesting the possession of the property into Drake Rubega. So Drake Rubega cannot lay his claim on possession and ownership on the basis of the Attorney General's opinion.
Okay,
that
so
cannot
what
happen.
exactly are you going to do?
So what we are going to do, I'm sitting down with their leadership. Of course, their leadership is not well coordinated. There is a careful. We are trying to come in. We are trying to see how we can intervene and go to court to address the same. In the meantime, secondly, we are pushing Parliament to fast track the enactment of the Landlord Tenant law. That is to address the broader issues. Thirdly, we are also trying to mobilize the tenants to come up with their own leadership to help us pursue their interests. Because if they remain scattered like that, certainly there isn't much that they can do to assert themselves. So we are trying to mobilize them to reinvigorate the associations so that they can be a little bit more assertive and aggressive in as far as pushing for these interests are concerned. So basically that's what we are doing in the meantime.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming to our studios tonight.
Thank you too.
Okay. That's it in Talk of the Nation. Thank you for joining us. Let us now go in for a short commercial break, but we'll be back shortly.
Kwanjulire always cotton soft. Zanjawulo akasusu kayo kagonvu ateka wewevu ku mubiri gwo ate nga zikuwummuza nga bwe zikuwa obukuumi olunaku lwonna. Zisangibwa mu maduuka gonna ku siringi 25 zokka. Wambalombo, wambalombo, wambalombo.